In the early 1700s, there were three powers looking to control the Georgia coast. That would be the French, who at the time were basically just still thinking about it, the Spanish, who had St. Augustine south into Florida, and the British, who had South Carolina and Charleston all the way north. So in 1721, the British decided they were going to come to the southernmost part of Georgia and build a fort and control the Georgia coast. Under Colonel Barnwell, well, it was a miserable failure. But under James Oglethorpe, it thrived. Welcome to Fort King George. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. It's right over here. Don't forget to hit that bell so that you'll be notified whenever we do an upload. In one of last week's comments, somebody said that there was so much history in southeast Georgia, but all you had to do was get off the interstate. Today's video is a prime example as to why that needs to happen. Welcome to Fort King George, the oldest English fort remaining on Georgia's coast. From 1721 to 1736, Fort King George was the southernmost outpost of the British Empire in North America. A cypress blockhouse, barracks, and palisaded earthen fort was constructed in 1721 by scoutmen led by Colonel John Barnwell. For the next 7 years, His Majesty's independent company garrisoned the fort. They endured incredible hardships from disease, threats of Spanish and Indian attacks, and the harsh, unfamiliar coastal environment. After the fort was abandoned, General James Oglethorpe brought Scottish Highlanders to the site in 1736. The settlement, called Darien, eventually became a foremost export center of lumber until 1925. Using old records and drawings, this 18th century frontier fortification on the Altamaha River has been reconstructed for public tours. Structures include a blockhouse, officers' quarters, barracks, guardhouse, moat, and palisades. In addition to the many fort buildings, remains of 3 sawmills and tabby ruins are still visible. The fort was built in 1721 along what is now known as the Darien River and served as the southernmost outpost for the British Empire in the Americas until 1727. The fort was constructed in what was considered to be part of the colony of South Carolina, but the territory was later settled as Georgia. It was part of the defensive line intended to encourage settlement along the colony's southern frontier from the Savannah River to the Altamaha River. Great Britain, France, and Spain were competing to control the American Southeast, especially the Savannah-Altamaha River region. Fort King George was a hardship for troops assigned there. A total of 140 officers, including Colonel Barnwell, and soldiers died, mostly from camp diseases such as dysentery and malaria due to poor sanitation, but none from battle. The soldiers made up the Independent Company of South Carolina, were what they call an Invalid Company of elderly British regulars, 100 in all, sent over from Great Britain. Their suffering was largely caused by their own poor health and inadequate provisions due to poor funding. Problems such as periodic river flooding, indolence, starvation, excessive alcoholism, desertion, enemy threats, and potential mutiny exacerbated the hardships at the fort. The fort was a model for General James Oglethorpe when he set up his southern defense system for Georgia and established a settlement along the Altamaha River. In 1736, Oglethorpe brought Scottish colonists to settle the site of the abandoned Fort George. They called their village New Inverness, later named Darien. That same year, Oglethorpe built Fort Frederica on St. Simon's Island. Oglethorpe borrowed extensively from ideas laid out earlier when South Carolina imperialists such as John Barnwell, Joseph Bowdler, and Francis Nicholson planned Fort King George as part of a defense system. For nearly 2 centuries after its last evacuation, little was written about or known of Fort King George. Occasionally, there are references to a Barnwell's Bluff, Old Fort, or First Landing in the records, but for the most part, Fort King George seemed to have faded into history. In the early 20th century, there was groundbreaking research into the early history of the state, and a lot of work was published about the early struggles for the empire in the colonial era. Sometime in the 1930s, Darien's local historian Bessie Lewis, then a history teacher, made many trips to Charleston, South Carolina to study British public records for information about the former Fort King George. Lewis, or Miss Bessie as locals fondly called her, discovered extensive material about the fort, including vital records, descriptions, account ledgers, and several drawings with geographical details. This guided her in trying to locate the original site of the fort. Archaeological excavations conducted later helped substantiate her claims. During the first excavations on the site in the 1940s, more than 12 soldiers' graves were uncovered. Miss Bessie and other locals organized the Fort King George Association and worked to have the site developed for a state historic site. In 1949, the state acquired the fort site from the Sea Island Company, which was a developmental organization. The association envisioned a site with a museum and reconstructed replica of Fort King George, but little development ever took place. Over the years from 1949 to 2004, sporadic work has been done to the historic site by different historical groups, both private and governmental. In 2004, with the installation of the fort's front and back gates, the fort was officially declared to be entirely reconstructed, something Miss Bessie had dreamed of more than 5 decades earlier, but had not lived to see. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit the subscribe button. It's right over here. Don't forget to hit that bell so that you'll be notified whenever we do an upload. Always remember, every trip starts with a step, and that step, well, it starts with you.